I know all of your clients really, really focus on mission, vision, values. Why is that so important for you to keep everyone so focused on that?
If you don't have your why, the hows are going to spin because it's not grounded in the why. That's the mission. The vision is the what and the how. So great, you've got your why, and most visionaries are good at that part, but then they don't have the what and the how. What is it that you're going to do, and how are you going to do it? And again, without both of those, the mission and the vision, things get tough. The values are the who. Who are you on this journey? That's how you'll make all your decisions. Everyone you bring on needs to be humble, hungry, and people smart. Because you're building a team, if you're trying to grow a business and you want to start adding people, you got to start to think about, what are my values? Who do I want to bring on based on those values?
When hiring, how do I know I'm getting, a humble and hungry person? Do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity? Are great questions to ask yourself instead of just being like, I think this person fits our culture.
If you get people with all three, humble, hungry, and people smart, you're going to have a great organization.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and today's guest is an extra special one for me personally, because I have a visionary, founder, and CEO of Rule the Room, but that's not why it's special. Special because he's one of my coaches and mentors in life and has been for some time. So I'm really excited to have this conversation for you all to hear. I would say kind of a hidden gem outside of his, internet following. He doesn't do much of the social media, so I consider him a hidden gem. But let me give you a little background. Jason was an expert in training at Epic Systems, which is a huge company here just outside Madison, Wisconsin, in Verona. He was the trainer of trainers there. And not only that, now he's into coaching and speaking and a whole bunch of other curriculum that we'll get into today. But he has a world-class presentation whenever he speaks. So I know you'll see some of that today, but when Jason is on stage, I think that's really when he truly shines, and he can move a crowd, and he teaches others to do the same. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Jason Teteak, my close friend, really important confidant in my life as a business owner and life coach. Jason Teteak, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that.
All right, my man. So I've said this to my wife and others, Alicia, many others, as I've even referred you out as like a way of describing you, like you're unshakable. Like I've gone through some massive shit in the past couple of years, as you know, and just in some of our conversations, like no matter what, you do not deviate from your like not necessarily emotions, but plan, or just from the call. No matter what, I could tell you that California just fell into the ocean in the middle of a call, and you'd keep us on task and be like, okay, Josh, but how does that affect your quarterly building blocks?
Yeah.
So why is it so important to keep people moving forward and focus on the task at hand, and especially you as a coach and mentor to those that are leading big businesses?
Yeah, I suppose it's part of my strengths on the Strengths Finder. I think part of that is the maximizer. I like to help people go from good to great. And I also think I like to meet people where they are and focus on what's important to them. And their building blocks, as you mentioned, is part of what's important to them. They tell me every quarter, here's the things that if we were to accomplish these, and these aren't necessarily production metrics that they're looking to accomplish. It could be anything in their life that's important to them. So when we keep the focus on those, what I'm really doing is I'm keeping the focus on serving them rather than whatever my agenda is. And you're right, sometimes there's things that go on in their life that get superimposed over those building blocks. They override those at that time. And so we focus on those things, but it's always about them. And that's actually the key to any kind of audience. My wife always used to tell me this when I would go to speak publicly. She would say to me, Jason, just remember, this isn't about you. This is about your audience. It's about them. Go serve those people. Go love those people. And so that's what I try to remember with any audience I have, whether it's coaching one-on-one or speaking in front of 1,000 people. It doesn't matter to me. I'm always focused on their needs and helping them grow and helping them meet their needs.
And you've spoken to some really large crowds, and I want to get back into your Epic background as well. But would you say that's the key? Would you say that's the key to speaking? Because so many people have a fear of public speaking, and I know you have a program that helps them around that
Yeah.
to become a world-class speaker. But would you
Yeah.
say that that's the absolute key, is to focus on them? When someone's in fear of public speaking, they're worried about people judging them or what's going to
Yes.
come out of their mouth or anything of that, instead of focusing on the receiver on the other end.
Yeah, I think I like to think of the quote from C.S. Lewis, who said that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less often.
Mm,
And there's two kinds of pride. There's the pride that's pretty typical, right? It's the one that, oh, look how great I am, the arrogant kind of a pride. But then there's the pride that says, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. I'm not good enough to public speak. I'm not good enough to do these things. And that's a false pride too, or that's a form of pride too. It's false humility, because both of them are focused on who? Me.
me.
So when the focus is on me, that's when all the fear starts to arise. But when we're focused on other people, when we're serving other people, when we're grateful for the things that we've been given, we keep the focus on meeting other people's needs, it becomes a lot easier. It doesn't make all of it go away. There's lots of ways to conquer fear of public speaking, but that is certainly a big one. I think the other one is to be authentic to who you are. I see so many gurus in public speaking that try to teach people how to speak the way they do it.
Yeah.
Right? You know, not everybody's a Tony Robbins. Not everybody's going to speak like him. So there's 4 public speaking styles, and it's important to be authentic and genuine and true to who you are, in addition to focused on the people. You're doing it in a way that's unique and natural for you.
So let's take it back. So you started with Epic Systems many, many years ago, and you're no longer with them, but I want to take it back, like, to how you became so dang good at speaking and training. Because I'm not sure even you and I have talked about that, because you started speaking and training to audiences of about 10,000 because Epic grew so fast.
Yep.
Take us back to the beginning and how that started and how you progressed so
Sure.
quickly to not only be as good as you were, but trusted with a massive company to train all the trainers there.
Yeah, I started at Epic in 2001. And when I started there was around 600 employees. And I think now it's almost 10,000, maybe more than 10, right around 10,000 people. And when I left there in 2012, 2013, there was around 6,000 or so. And before I went to Epic, I was a teacher. I taught high school math and English. And so that's really where I started with the first audience that I had. And when I first started there was a woman that was student teaching with me. So I was helping her learn how to teach. And she said to me, I think I'm going to apply to this. I don't know if I'm going to be a teacher actually after we're all done. She said, I think I'm going to apply to this company called Epic. And I said, well, what's that? And she goes, well, she started explaining all of that it was. And she said, you should apply there. And I said, no, I love teaching. I love kids. This is what I love to do. And she said, well, this is kind of teaching too. You're just teaching adults. And I thought, oh, that sounded interesting. I've never done that before. I've taught elementary school and middle school and high school. I was thinking this might be a fun thing. So I started training at Epic, and they bring all these people from around the world. And I would train what was called inpatient at the time, which is where we trained a lot of the people in the clinical world about how to use the software in hospitals and clinics. And I started doing really well there. And they said, Jason, could you teach other people how to do this? How to get the kinds of evaluation scores that you're getting, and how to get the kind of rapport and credibility and engagement that's happening for you. So I started doing that. And then they started sending me around the country to go to other people who were needing help with training, not just at Epic, but all of our Epic's clients. And then they said, Jason, we want you to travel around the world and help all these different clients. And I said, eventually I just said, that's just too much travel for me. So we recorded a DVD at the time on how to train and communicate with trainers. And then it started to get into soft skills with other kinds of roles, implementation, QA, and developers, and all these different technical service roles. And I started teaching them how to speak and train and teach. And eventually this led to the company Rule the Room, where I started to do things on my own, where I would teach people how to communicate, how to train, how to teach, how to public speak, anything that involved an audience. But how it all started was that I guess it's a little bit of what my dad did when he was in elementary school. He started the SAGE program in Wisconsin, which limited the class sizes to 18 for elementary kids. And he started to work with teachers to train them on how to be effective. And I started to learn some of the things he did and started using that with adults. And it all started from there.
Man, that's so interesting. So what I think about is, because I know you well, is I think that you listen to the whispers, as I call them, better than I think anyone. And what was planted in you was a seed. And then because you and I share the same faith in Christianity, I know that you pray hard when you hear those whispers, when you get those seeds planted. And you've pivoted many times in your life. I want to talk about those whispers for a second. How do you, when a seed is planted, like one was planted initially when you were a teacher, and now, and then going into the epic systems, and then you were going to go to seminary for a while, all the while
Yeah.
you're coaching and doing this, these different things. You're like, I'm going
Yep.
to start my own company. I'm going to start pouring into business owners like myself all over the country,
Yep.
all these different things that you've kind of tackled. How do you decipher those whispers and those seeds planted? Because some take those whispers and they go a million different directions and never focus on one. You have found ways to listen to those whispers, pray hard on those whispers, and then go.
Yeah.
So
That's a
tell
great
the
question.
audience a little bit about how those whispers in your prayer lead you to that go answer.
Yeah, I believe that true ultimate wisdom comes from God's word, the Bible, and that's where we go to get real wisdom. And one of the things that the Bible says in Isaiah is that whether you go to the left or you go to the right, there'll be a voice behind you that says, "This is the way, walk in it." And so a lot of people think, well, I have to ask God, which way should I go, and He'll give me this sign and He'll tell me. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes He lets you just choose, and whichever way you go, He will bless that. I remember when I was 45 years old, I decided I was coaching at the time, coaching people like you and others. But I had just started that, and I had just finished with Rule the Room Financial, and we had built this great company that has served a lot of people with respect to their financial advising practice and other things. And I said, maybe it's time maybe I should go study to be a pastor. So my wife and at the time, I think he was 5 or 6-year-old son, we left Wisconsin and we moved to New Ulm, Minnesota. And I went to Bible college. It's called the Decipher program. Essentially, I did 4 years of college in 2 years. I had already gotten a degree from the University of Wisconsin in education, which is what I did when I taught. But I decided to go back to school at 45 years old and sit in classrooms with 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds. And I learned Greek, and I learned the original language of the Bible, Greek, Hebrew. I learned Christian doctrine. Without a doubt, the most difficult classes I've ever had. And I've taken every math course that University of Wisconsin offers. Never taken a class as difficult as Hebrew or Greek. It's hard for an old brain to learn that stuff. And so I did this, and I actually graduated from the SEMCERT program. And then, and how did I make that decision? I just thought, this feels like the right thing to do, but I didn't feel like I was called to do it. I just felt like I wanted to do it, and God blesses that. Then I decided at the end of that, I said, well, do we want to go to seminary? That's another 4 years after the 2 years that we did. Most guys spend 8 years in the seminary school, but the old guys only have to do 6 because we have a college degree. So that counts for the other 2 years. And so we decided not to do that. Instead, we decided to come alongside a couple of Mission Start churches and help them get started in Florida. And then we did now we're doing something similar in North Carolina. But in all of this, I've been coaching clients, and I love doing that, love helping them grow. And, as long as I'm a big believer that as long as you do all the things to God, give all the glory to God. And that's what I talked about at the beginning of my book. It's not whether we go to the right or left. It's that we're praising and glorifying Him as we do it. And He will work all things out for the good of those who love and are called according to His purpose. And that's what has happened. So it's funny, the very last day of my time at MLC was Martin Luther College, is where I went to Bible school. The president of the college, who's also a pastor, gets up and gives a sermon. And his sermon was based on that Isaiah passage, whether you go to the left or the right. And he was talking to all these graduates. And he was telling them, some of you are going to keep going to seminary. Some of you aren't. Some of you are going to become teachers. Some of you are going to be staff ministers. Some of you aren't going to go this way. Whether you go to the left or the right, there'll be a voice behind you that says, this is the way, walk in it. He directs our paths. And so I just trust him.
That's so good. And makes me think of a couple different ways, or a couple different thoughts anyhow, is we have these repeated thoughts, say around, science says around 60,000 thoughts per day, 90% of which are the same thoughts that we've had in the past. And I could see someone listening to us speak right now going, okay, well, I have, Josh says 60,000 thoughts, or science says 60,000 thoughts per day.
Yeah.
Which whispers, which thoughts are the ones I'm supposed to listen to?
Right.
What would you say to that?
Well, that I always say, check your Bible. That's how you can tell. People say, I don't believe in God because I can't see him. Well, look around, you'll see evidence of him. Right? You can't go to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, the mountain I was just at on Sunday with my son, and not have that point to God. You think about it this way. A lot of people, when they think of God, they think of think about Disney World. When I go to Disney World, I'm going to see a sign. When I lived in Florida, I saw a sign that says, this is the way to Disney World. A lot of people, if you just focus on the earth and just focus on what God has made, it's like stopping at the sign and saying, I'm here at Disney World. Even though Disney World is the thing you want to be at, you're at the sign that's pointing to it. And so many people do that with life. They stop at the sign pointing to God. The mountain is just an opportunity to see the sign that points to him. The gifts I've been given are just signs that point to him. The wife that I have is just a sign that points to him. When I kiss her, I enjoy that so much. That's just a sign that points to his glory. Life is all about pointing to him. That's the key. So when with your question, how do we know which one to do? How do we know which thought? We go back and say, well, what does he say? He speaks to us in his word. We get to speak to him through prayer. That's the two-way conversation. You want to know what to do. You want to know what he says, check with what he says, and compare that with your thoughts. The Bible says to take captive our thoughts, or to look at them, spin them around, make sure that they're what he's saying, because if they're not coming from him.
Yes. And also seeking counsel from people that you trust so that you can see those, because oftentimes we're only seeing, as you held up your hand as like a globe, is like we're only seeing this side of the globe. And sometimes our thoughts, because they're so rooted, will only allow us to see that side of the globe until we talk to someone that's wise, someone that we trust, that can flip that globe around for us and say, over here, you missed this part.
Right. Yep. As long as that globe is pointing back to him and what he says, because it's all there. Yeah. So many times we're tempted to say, oh, I've got all this wisdom over here. You don't have this wisdom over here. You got to go over here. And Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. It's all here in the Bible. It's all there. That's where you go.
It just made me think of, well, there's nothing new under the sun. And then also like the phrase that we hear often, history repeats itself. That just made me just a correlation there. I don't know if there's any meaning to it other than that was kind of an aha for me. But so we've spoken about the Bible, which I know is the ultimate truth and one of your go-to books. You've also introduced me to two books that, to my world anyhow, that have changed my life in a couple different ways. One being Positive Intelligence, the other being Rocket Fuel.
Yeah.
And so Positive Intelligence, I guess before we get into the books per se, my question is, you run a busy, tight schedule. And I want to give the audience a flavor for how you prioritize and how you build in time for prayer and kind of thinking about those thoughts that you have and seeing them from all angles and making sure they go back to the word. How you build in time to read and study, because folks, when I tell you, when Jason reads, he doesn't read a book to check it off the list. Like boom, check that off. Someone recommended it to me, checked it off. No. When I say he read Positive Intelligence, loved it, then got involved with Dr. Shirzad's program and got trained on how to teach it, because he loved the book so much. He takes it to the nth degree when he wants to know something. So,
Yeah.
so talk to the audience about A, why that's important to you, B, how you build it into your very busy schedule.
Sure. The couple of questions there, I'll cover them all. How do you build time for prayer? Thinking about how do you handle the thoughts and think about those, and then bringing in the positive intelligence and rocket fuel. The positive intelligence is a book about thoughts, and it's also a book about two different parts of the brain, the left side and the right side. And the left side is where the saboteurs live. The right side is where the sage live, and we all have both. We all have both. The problem is that most people, their saboteurs are hidden. And Shazad always says, would you rather fight an enemy you can't see or one you can? And so the first part of the positive intelligence is how people to unveil for them, what are these saboteurs? The judge's self and others and circumstances. And the hyperachiever, the hyper-rational, the hyper-vigilant, the stickler, pleaser, the victim, the controller, all these different saboteurs, there's more, mess with us. And they try to say things to us that are lies. They promise us one thing and they deliver another. The sage, on the other hand, the other side of the brain, is where the happiness lives, but not just happiness, the empathy circuitry lives there as well. It's the neofrontal cortex right above the right eye. This is where we have the ability to be curious and have empathy and love for other people and be creative and have decision-making prowess and take laser-focused action without fear. So essentially, bottom line is this. The left side of the brain, right above the eye there, the amygdala, that's where fight, flight, freeze, or fold lives, those 4 Fs. That is where the saboteurs run the show. And the saboteurs motivate us through one thing, fear. I love talking about this with financial advisors, because when financial advisors first enter their career, a lot of times they, and sometimes even their leaders, try to motivate them through fear, scarcity. And the problem with this is you might get some breadcrumbs of success, but you won't get the bread. And you also won't be happy. You won't be fulfilled. Whereas the sage motivates us and others through love. So I always ask this question, if you're interested in the positive intelligence, ask yourself this question: would you rather continue to push yourself and others through fear for the rest of your life? Or would you prefer to make a shift and pull yourself and others through love? Because the saboteurs are all about fear and the sage is all about love. And the reason I like this, the reason this is so important to me is goes back to your questions, Josh, that you asked. How do you build time in for prayer and think about those thoughts? It was because of the saboteurs and identifying them that I could start to recognize more easily what the thoughts were, what the lies were. There's another great book called The Lies We Believe by Chris Thurman, which is essentially the same thing as positive intelligence with a Christian slant. But the idea is this, that our sinful nature, the enemy, they all throw these thoughts at us that are lies, and we have to take them captive. We have to look at them, like you said. That's why I'm turning my hand like a globe. We have to look at this thought and say, is this what God says? Is this a good thought? Is it a true thought? And if it's not a true thought, what do I do with this? And so I actually wake up every morning at 5:30, and the first thing that I do after getting in the Word and hearing what God says is I analyze my thoughts. One pastor said he not only brushes his teeth in the morning, he brushes his beliefs. And
That's
so
really
this
good.
is big. My job is not just to take care of myself physically. I used to be this way. I used to comb my hair and grow my muscles physically and show up with a suit on and say, well, look at how great Jason Teteak is. And then I discovered there's a lot more to people than just what they look like. You gotta take care of yourself mentally and emotionally and spiritually. There's the trifecta of the chair, right? There's physical resiliency, emotional resiliency, and spiritual resiliency. So ask yourself, those of you listening to this, how you doing in those 3 areas? How would you score yourself? And so for me, I pray and I get into the Word first thing in the morning. If I don't do that, I'm not grounded, I'm not centered. And I turn around one thought every day, first thing in the morning. Whatever I have, these thoughts keep coming back. When they do, I return them around. And for me, I turn them around based on God's Word. Here's the lie, here's the thought. For example, a thought that I turned around last week was, Jason, you are unworthy of love. What does God say about that? He says, I'm his dearly loved child. He died for me, right? Not because I'm worthy, but because of what he did. But now I'm worthy because of what he did. That is a very different thought than the focus and the selfish focus of me focusing on how unworthy I am. Again, that's that false pride, focusing on me again, rather than what he wants me to do, which is to love others, serve other people. That's back to the audience of focusing on them rather than me. And this is how I get my energy, serving and loving him and others.
Let's pause right there before we get in, because you said something super powerful, as always. But the unworthy of love thought, what percentage of society you think lives with that thought?
I think a lot of people do. Back to some of the audience that I work with, for example, financial advisors, there's two saboteurs that are the most common for financial reps and financial advisors that are extremely successful: controller and hyperachiever. And the controller lies to us and says that I have to, if I don't do it myself, it won't be done well enough. I have to control the whole thing to make it go well. But the hyperachiever, this is the one we're talking about, says that I'm only worthy based on my successes. Without those successes, I'm nothing. So I have to keep getting accolades. I have to keep getting trophies. I have to keep building businesses. I have to keep hitting the next number. I have to keep getting more ribbons. I have to keep doing whatever it is. And I celebrate it for a little while once I hit something, but then I got to do something else because I'm unworthy again unless I hit it. And I always say this, so many people go to their graves every year trying to satisfy the last condition of their judge that says you'll only be worthy unless you do this. It's so sad. So that's, I think the tremendous amount of people are constantly focused on the fact that they're unworthy and they got to hit something else. This is why America's so busy all the time, right? This is why other countries don't have this as much, because they're not so focused on themselves and how worthy they are and their accomplishments and their money and their stuff and all the accolades and achievements that they have. They're more focused on love, loving others, loving and God and what he wants. You're not going to take that stuff with you.
Yeah, and exactly. You can't take any of your successes with you, nor your material things. So what I want to make sure that people understand as well is we can be a success-driven society, but love is the more powerful tool, is what you're saying, what Dr. Shazad is saying, what God is saying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with success. I'm glad you pointed that out, Josh, because we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Use your talents. You've been given those. Use those. Be successful. The key is where does your heart live? If your heart lives and is based on, and your worth is based on what you do, you will always be disappointed because it'll never be enough, right? That hyperachiever is a monster that can never be satisfied, just constantly eats. So what I'm saying is, have some success. Do that. That's great. And remember, your worth isn't tied to it. I said this to my son, actually, dropped him off today at school. And I said, he actually has a test today for a gifted class he wants to get into. He has to take a test for it. And then he has a soccer tryout tonight. It's a pretty big day for an 11. Yeah. And I said to him, Trey, just remember, good luck, God's blessings on those two things. But remember that my love for you is not dependent upon whether you succeed in those. That's where this all starts, by the way. When parents, sometimes not even intentionally, suggest to their kids, oftentimes subconsciously, that, my love for you is dependent upon how well you do in things, we start to want to keep doing that as adults.
Yep.
And so
I
tell,
even imply it, and it's not even said, it's implied.
Yes.
If you're not careful.
Yep. So I tell Trey, and this is something also I learned from a pastor, is that, Trey, my love for you is always an 11 out of 10. That will never change. There's nothing you can do that will move my love from an 11 down below a 10. It can't happen. I also say your permissions, what you get to do as a kid, that's dependent on what I allow you to do, on whether I can trust you, on how much you respect your mother and myself, those kinds of things, that is dependent upon those decisions that you make are going to impact what you are allowed to do. But my love for you is never going to change. And we got to separate that stuff for kids and
Permissions
for
and love.
ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes, because
Yeah.
that's how we end up tying our worth to our achievements, is we think that somehow our love is based on what we do, and it's not. That's what's so great about our God. Jesus loves you regardless of what you do.
That is so, so good. So, so powerful. I think every parent should rewind that and really just think about a couple different instances where they've spoken wrong to their children based on the premise that you just laid out. We've all done it. I've done it,
yeah.
especially in a heated moment, right?
Yep.
Where we can say the wrong things, or even saying to the point like, you're making me so mad right now. That's saying to your child that they're making you mad, like you have no control over your emotions.
Yes.
Right. So like even stating that is something that I've said before and know that it's wrong.
Yes.
And have to go and correct myself and then have a conversation, a humble conversation with my kids saying, Daddy shouldn't have said that. Here's what I meant.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the kid that may even be one of the most important people for us to say that to is the little 5-year-old in each of us.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's little JT, right? I talk to him every morning too. And I remind him that he's loved by God no matter what he does. He needs to be reminded of this. The way we talk to ourselves is the way we end up talking to others. And so a lot of people will put on a facade. I was fake, right? I would talk to myself in these horrible ways, but then I would get up on stage or talk to people one-on-one and act like it's all fine. And the reality is whether we want to or not, that stuff's going to come out. It's going to come out with our kids. It's going to come out with our spouse. So you gotta talk to that little 5-year-old of yourself and remind them that they're worthy of love. Again, for me anyway, not because of something I've done, but because of what he's done for me. Yeah. And that kind of stuff, that's gonna translate. How can I possibly talk nicely to my son if I'm not talking nicely to myself?
Or your wife, or any relationship.
Yeah, or my wife. Yeah, we were talking about my son, but absolutely, I can't love her effectively if I don't love myself. And this isn't selfish. This is part of what positive intelligence is talking about. I need to put others first, the Bible says. I need to serve other people. And I need to remember what he's done for me. And that's why I'm constantly working on those thoughts. So I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we started this, we got on a tangent, but it was a really good one. So I'm glad we did. But we started with, how do you build in time to study the way you do?
Yeah.
We talked about the prayer piece, but like, you study a book or a topic until you really, really have it, where I feel like a lot of people that I coach or that I just interact with read books to check them off, almost like it's like, hey, I've got this big of a book stack.
Yes. The way that I do that is I remember the 5 stages of learning. And this is, if you have a notebook, you might want to write this down. It's really important for a lot of reasons I'll share in a second. But the 5 stages of learning is, stage 1 is whenever you're like, let's say somebody's listening to this podcast right now and they're learning something. Maybe that's what's happening. The first stage is what are Josh and Jason talking about? I don't get it. If you've ever been in a physics class, you know what I mean, right? Or for me, it was a Greek class. There was times in that class where I just didn't get it. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is, I can see what Josh is saying. I can see what he's saying. But watch this. Most people, when they listen to a podcast like this, or when they read a book, they get to stage 2 and think they're done. I can see what he's saying. Next book, please. But that's not the final stage of learning. The third stage of learning is, I can do this with help. I can do this on my own as long as I have some help. I got to go back to the book. I got to go back to Josh, remind myself what he said. The 4th stage is, I can do it by myself. I can do it all by myself. I don't need any help anymore. And then the 5th stage is, I can teach this to other people. And I happen to be a teaching style person. I'm born a teacher. It's part of who I am. So when I read books, I can't just get to stage 2. I can't just say, well, I can see what he's doing. If I really like it, I have to go to stage 5. That's just how I'm wired. I'll read some other books. If I don't like them, I won't go to stage 5. So I can see what he's saying and I'll put it down. But some books like Rocket Fuel and Positive Intelligence in the Bible, I want to get to stage 5. That helps me synthesize.
Yep.
So how do I find the time? I put it in the mornings. I'll put it in slots where if a client says I'm not able to meet this time, I'll learn during that time. Anytime I can, I'm trying to focus on growing so that I can better serve others. Again, it's always where the focus is. My focus is on loving and serving other people. That's why I learned when I read the Positive Intelligence that this could help a lot of people. I'm gonna really study this one.
Yep. And the other piece of it is you don't limit your learnings, right? So I think you and I have talked about that. We're not sure if Dr. Shahzad, what he believes faith-wise, right? I know he certainly doesn't speak to it in Positive Intelligence, but you being so closely tied to your faith, don't rule that out just because he doesn't profess that he's a Christian. Where I've seen a lot of people make this mistake. Well, he doesn't believe what I believe, so he doesn't have anything to teach me. That's not true. Everyone can be a teacher in one way or another.
Yeah, and that is also the one way to. This is a great example. Should we test that thought? Sure. Let's see what Scripture says. It says God works all things out for the good of those who love Him. So we're able to take those things, and if we understand, again, compare them to Scripture. What does God say? And say, what can I take and leave the rest? That's how we learn. That's how we grow. There's always something that can be taught.
Awesome. So Rocket Fuel, the other book that we mentioned here, I just bring this up because it was a book that you introduced to me that brought my integrator into my life, Alicia, and she's running the podcast, running us right now, making sure we sound good, look good, whatever.
Yeah.
But one of those books that you can learn from that you can implement right away different things to better yourself, better your business. And it's interesting. I just love how you utilize your learnings, teach to your clients, and have them, own it from there.
Yeah. Rocket Fuel is a great book. It is something that a lot of people think when they read Rocket Fuel, they talks about the visionary and the integrator and how they're wired very differently. You need both of them to go around, to have the company go around. And they think, well, I don't have a company with 1,000 people or 50 people, so I don't need Rocket Fuel. And I would suggest that they rethink that. And the reason for that is even if you have a 2-person team, you and another person, I would still recommend that you find somebody who can be your quote integrator while you do your other things, because they're just different wirings of different ways to do things. And we need both in any firm. You need 2 people. You need a leader and a manager. And you need somebody who's going to be able to work in the business and somebody who can work on the business. And a lot of times for a new entrepreneur, you're doing both. And most great entrepreneurs are a little bit of a visionary and a little bit of an integrator. They have to be. But eventually you're going to have to choose. And the Rocket Fuel would suggest that if you have to choose, and you've been doing both for a while, typically the visionary is what you choose, because then you can continue to vision and grow. And then you bring on somebody who can be an integrator for you. And that's what you did with Alicia.
Yep. Well, and I can attest to that because I went from a firm and a business of 250 people to a firm and business of 2 people. And the one person I brought with me was my integrator. So I can attest to that it is a crucial role for any size business. It's just hard to find the right person. So you glanced on vision, and you keep me, and I know all of your clients, really, really focused on mission, vision, values. Why is that so important for you to keep everyone so focused on that? I think in general, people hear these buzzwords and they know that they should have them, but why is it so important? Because I think that it gets talked about from a 30,000 foot view very often, but not from the micro level often enough.
Yeah, the mission, vision, and principles or values, the MVP, I call it, is so important because it serves as a rudder for your boat. I tried sailing a few years ago, and I forgot to put the rudder down, but I forgot to put the centerboard in. And the wind came and it just spun me. It was awful. And that's what happens when you don't have an MVP. You spin. Now, it might not be as obvious as that boat was for me, because you can go a little bit in the boat until the wind comes. But once it comes and you don't have your MVP, you spin. Some people spin for years and they don't know it. I've had clients say to me, Jason, help me get off this hamster wheel. That's what he called it. The hamster wheel is spinning. That's what happens without a mission, vision, and values. So the mission is why you do what you do. And Simon Sinek, go watch one of his videos on this. It's a TED talk that he does on the why. It's fantastic.
Start with Why is his book.
Yeah, and he talks about in this video, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he doesn't say I have a plan. He says I have a dream, right? He had the dream before the plan. That's the mission. That's the dream. It's why you're doing what you're doing. If you have a plan, but you don't know why you're doing, you could have all the greatest hows in the world. But if you don't have your why, the hows are going to spin because it's not grounded in the why. That's the mission. And then the vision is the what and the how. The vision is the what and the how. So great, you've got your why, and most visionaries are good at that part, but then they don't have the what and the how. What is it that you're going to do, and how are you going to do it? And again, without both of those, the mission and the vision, things get tough. We start to spin them. And then lastly are the values. And this is the one that's the most misunderstood and often the most neglected. The values are the who. Who are you on this journey? And I always say it this way, and then entrepreneurs start to raise their right eyebrow when they hear me say this. The values, if they're right, those 7 words that you create for your organization and you, that's how you'll make all your decisions.
Mm-hmm.
If you make a decision that's not aligned with one of those values, it's the wrong decision for you. It has to be aligned, or the values aren't right. One of the two, because you're always going to decide what to do based upon those values. So once you have that mission, the why, the vision, the how and the what, and the values, the who in place, now each quarter, that 12-week year, it's another great book, is going to end up being, it's going to just be easier, right? That's why we get back to the quarterly building blocks. Those quarterly building blocks are easy once you've got those why, what, how, and who in place, because now you've got the centerboard in, you've got the rudder down, the wind's coming in, and your sailboat's going exactly the direction that you need to go.
Yep. And to add to that, on the values side, I think that can be the most important tool you have for many of things. For instance, having a difficult conversation with an employee.
Yes.
Right. So if standards are there, values are there, and they're not abiding by those values, or they're doing something wrong, you can point right to those values and say, this is exactly who we are and what we represent, and you are not living up to that based on this example, and this example. If you don't have those, then it's a constant moving target for any employee in your organization.
Mm-hmm. And this is why I love that the guy who wrote Rocket Fuel, his name's Gino Wickman. If you want another book, it's called Traction by Gino Wickman. And he talks about 3 concepts in there. GWC, get it, want it, and capacity to do it. And this is what you're looking for when you're looking for team members, partners in business or whatever, staff. You're looking for people that get it, that want it, and have the capacity to do it. And if they don't have those 3, they're not in the right role. And then there's another book that I really love called The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni that talks about humble, hungry, and people smart. And those are values that, in my opinion, all businesses need to have. Everyone you bring on needs to be humble, hungry, and people smart. And Patrick lays it out in this book for why. He's the guy that wrote the 5 Dysfunctions of the Teams. Yep. But these are the values, right? And so you have to decide what your values are. But for me, those really resonated for me. And that's, for those of you listening, this is really, as you're building a team, if you're trying to grow a business and you want to start adding people, you got to start to think about, what are my values? Who do I want to bring on based on those values? This MVP, everything we do, when we look back 10 years later, we're going to look at this MVP and say, that was the nuclear reactor, right? The core thing that allowed this whole thing to go, powered the whole thing. Yep.
And when you're that GWC, I love, because so many times people are trying to figure out, okay, when hiring, how do I know I'm getting, a humble and hungry person? Mm-hmm. Well, do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity? Are great questions to ask yourself instead of just being like, oh, I think this person fits our culture, or I
Yeah.
think this person would really do a good job based on their personality profile or whatever it may be. You just
Right.
slow down and ask those 3 questions of yourself based on getting to know the person, asking your questions, doing your due diligence. Do they match your values? And then ask those 3 questions. Whether
Yep.
it's a promotion or a new hire, you're going to have a far greater success ratio.
Yes. And Patrick has figured this out, that if you don't have all three, humble, hungry, and smart, if you just have, for example, hungry only, you get bulldozer people on your team. If you have smart only, you get the charmers. If you have humble and hungry but not smart, you get the accidental mess makers. If you have humble and smart but not hungry, you get the lovable slackers. And the worst of all is when you have hungry and smart but not humble. You get what he calls the skillful politicians. And these, by the time a leader discovers what's going on with these people, there's a trail of destruction that came about. So if you get people with all three, humble, hungry, and people smart, you're going to have a great organization.
Yeah,
And
I've
this
had a
is
couple
why
of
this
those.
MVP is so important, you know?
I've had a couple of those that took me a while to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
It cost me a lot of energy, time, and many other things, but that's a
Yes.
different story for a different day.
Yeah.
All right. So we're wrapping up on time. I know you're at the top of the hour. We got to be done, but I want to talk through real quick is you and I are both coaches, and I always find it very important for people to understand that we both have coaches
Yeah.
that help and guide us.
Yep.
What do you look for yourself when looking for a coach? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think that this industry that you and I are both in is filled with a lot of pretenders. And
Yeah.
too many people don't have tools to understand who is going to be good or who's going to be good for them. So I'd love to get your opinion on that.
Well, I'm looking for humble, hungry, and smart people. Smart, first of all, that's important. But that's a great question, Josh, because it lets me reflect on this. I have two coaches right now, and I'm really interested. I'm always interested in having coaches, and I think about these coaches and what are their qualities. I'd say number one is that they really know their stuff. I feel like if I need them to, they can consult for me when I need them to. So coaching, I believe that great coaches do three things. They coach, they consult, and they train, and they know when to do which one. Sometimes we really do need a consultant that says, hey, I say to my coach, hey, what do other people do? I have one coach who coaches our marriage. And this coach, Jess, and I get on at the same time, and we say, hey, what's working for other marriages here? And she can tell us, right? She knows. But then other times we just need to talk. We need to talk through stuff, and she can find out what's in us and help us fly in the direction we need to go. And then my personal coach, not only is that person able to coach and consult, but sometimes I need training. I need somebody to say, hey, teach me, coach, what I need to do here. And that's really helpful too. But of the three, the one I'm looking for the most is the coach of the three, not the consultant, not the trainer. I can get a lot of that stuff online. What I'm looking for is somebody that can coach me, who understands me, who tailors it to my world, who understands how to help me fly in my direction. So this is when I always have somebody come in and say, hey, I got a referral, and the referral comes to me and says, would you mind, Jason, if I talk to some of your clients? I want to see how you coach. And I said, sure, here's 5 names. They come back to me and say, wow, you talked to all the 5 people, you coach them very differently. And I said, well, sure, I do. I tailor my approach to the individual. I don't coach anyone the same way because they all have different needs. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody that understands Jason and can help coach me on what is going on for me so that I can go serve others.
Yep. No, it's really, really good. The other thing I'd add to it is a track record of success.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I like that. And so that you need these coaches need a platform. If you're thinking about being a coach, you do need a platform, some track record to say, here's what I've done. And sometimes that might mean coaching for free for a while and saying, hey, here's somebody I coached. This is what happened for them. Now I've had some success. It's time to move on. It's just like a brand new financial advisor. How do you know you should work with somebody that's a year in the business? Well, they've worked with some other people, but yeah, they do need a track record of success, and they need a track record of success with you. So after your first month, how's it going? Are you getting what you need from them?
Yeah, that's really good. Really, really good stuff. So with just a couple minutes left, I was just thinking about this. If all of your online stuff, your books, all of that somehow just disappeared, what's the lasting impact you want to have?
Yeah, I think of this kind of like a legacy question.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I was thinking is legacy. Because
Yeah,
it's interesting. I've been, in all the time we've known each other, I haven't necessarily asked you that.
it's a great question. I I have about 60 programs that I've built online. Some of them are an hour, some are 3 days long. And I think about if they were all gone and the book was gone. Um, there's a great song by Casting Crowns that says, I can't remember the exact way it goes, but something along the lines of, um, they're not going to, I don't want them to remember me. I want them to remember Jesus.
Hmm.
So that's my job, is to point people to him. A lot of people who are Christians say, how do I talk to others about him? And the answer is, don't, you can talk about yourself in the sense of, here's what he did for me. But we're just like that Disney World sign, pointing to him. So if on my tombstone, my legacy at my funeral, whatever it is, people say he pointed others to Christ, I had a successful life.
So good. Yeah. And I know that's true about you. So it's fun to hear you say that out loud. And hopefully that brought some uh, good thoughts to your head as you think about that, because that was a
Yeah,
question out of the blue.
I
So
appreciate that. It's a great question.
yeah, well, Lewis Howes asked it in a different way. And that's kind of where I stemmed that question from in his School of Greatness podcast. But it was just something you and I never talked about. So I figured I'd ask it. So with all that being said, I know you're not a big social media guy. Where can the audience find you and follow you or book you if
Yeah.
need be?
Well, I have a website called ruletheroompublicspeaking.com, another website called ruletheroomtrainthetrainer.com, and another one called ruletheroomfinancial.com. You can check out stuff that I have there. I'm also on Udemy, lots of programs on Udemy. And then you can also just email me, jason@ruletheroom.com, and I'm happy to get in touch with you as well.
That's when you know you're good, is you don't require any social media presence whatsoever, and still can get booked up.
Social media is a great tool. I do think that's true. I love talking with people like this.
Yeah, and you're good at it, and you're having a huge impact through all the people that you're influencing as well, and pointing them to Christ. So I know that to be true. So
Yeah,
we'll keep you on time today. I so appreciate you being with us.
my
Audience,
pleasure.
please share this episode. We got into some fun topics that I didn't even intend on going to today, but we end up going there because that's where the conversation led us. So with that being said, remember, good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.